Hello, and welcome to BCG's Financial Institutions Leaders View series. I'm Douglas Beal, a partner at BCG, where I also lead our social impact work with financial institutions. We're joined in the studio today by Richard Kolos, the Global Head of Social Impact and Human Rights at ABN AMRO. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Richard, to start, what do you believe might be the most important social topics for 2023, in particular that banks should be thinking about and concerned about?
I think the biggest issue today for this year is really the kind of the price explosions that we've seen throughout basically the globe. The increase in inflation, especially in Europe, because of course the price of energy that gone up, and the impact that's having on both consumers as well as corporates. Next to that, you see, the more longer term, you'll see that the social impact of us as economies and societies not fully reducing climate change, being able to adapt to climate change properly, adapting to biodiversity loss and fighting biodiversity loss, that will really create like mass involuntary migration. So what we're seeing today is just from a social point of view, just a start.
Continuing with this topic, this year we've seen a lot of upheaval. The war in Ukraine, coming out of COVID, you mentioned migration. What are some of the most important topics, and how would you see 2023 looking different from years past?
What you see is that in times of crisis, everything gets amplified. You know, the resilience of the lack of resilience of people, you see amplified. You see the social inequalities amplified, but you also see like the societal acceptance of all these enormous changes being very hard to deal with. The energy crisis that you see in Europe is just like a small taste of what we're going to see in the major transitions that we have to go through. So what we need to focus on is to really look at, okay, are we as societies and economies, are we able to cope with all that? We've seen some wonderful examples. We've seen, economies where suddenly overnight 20-30% of energy reduction has been realized, apparently without much problem. But of course, if this continues, then you see that the impact on businesses and therefore also on communities is going to be really much bigger. People have been very receptive, have been very willing to accept, for example, refugees and those kind of things. That will wane down, that will disappear over time if this takes longer. So what can we do, what should we do also as corporates to build upon the resilience of societies and the resilience of our economies?
Let's turn a little bit to how social impact applies to a bank, and in particular at ABN AMRO. Do you see the importance of social as being, let's say, most important from a revenue perspective, from a reputational perspective, from a risk perspective, or is it all three or something else?
It's basically all three, because on the one hand, it's really from a risk perspective. As bankers, we're quite focused on risk analysis, and you could sum it up as saying no business can be successful if the society it operates in fails. So if we see the resilience of economies and societies going down, then the companies we lend money to will become more at risk. So it's really a risk subject to like look further ahead, look what is happening, and so that you can able to address it and to manage it. But looking through this lens, looking through this people lens, we've also seen some really remarkable revenue opportunities. Because at the end of the day, if we'll manage the risk properly, we'll also be able to grasp the opportunity. One revenue area that we really discovered because we were looking through this people lens is that we have a certain group of clients that were really underserving. And by the way, we found out that it's really a global issue for the financial industry, and that is women, female clients. Globally, women are really giving very low grades to their financial services provider. They really feel underserved. By really adjusting the way you sell your products and train your sales for example, become aware of unconscious biases that we all have, and maybe repackaging your products in a different way and putting different emphasis, we identified that it's really a major potential profit contributor in our retail business. And by the way, that also will mean that if we do it correctly, that our client appreciation, our NPS, will go up tremendously. So it's not just a social agenda, but it's really also improving your client centricity agenda. So we've seen significant revenue opportunities. And maybe lastly, it's also like it highlights the fact that if you're, as a bank, only looking at the financials, you'll find for the next 12 to 18 months, that's still the best predictor for the success of the businesses you invest in. But if you want to have a long-range radar, if you really want to see what's coming to, then you really have to kind of put this extra lens on and look through it and see what it brings to you.
Richard, that's interesting. How about the reputational aspect of this?
The reputational aspect is very closely linked to your license to operate. So, for example, we saw in COVID that suddenly, overnight, a lot of SMEs were under tremendous stress. And the fact that, for example, we as an organization said, okay, you don't have to ask for a payment holiday for your interest and repayments. We'll just provide it to you, and if you don't need it, please reach out to us. That was a step that seemed not to be in the short-term best interest of the organization, but it created an enormous reputational uplift to us. And it helped our clients a lot, and by the way, it also helped our operation because, of course, now we had very few requests instead of hundreds of thousands.
So how do you create real business value through the social opportunity?
The real business value is often not, immediately clear. So, for example, in any banking operation, you see problematic debt as something you have to manage, especially with retail clients. If retail clients get into problematic debt, you have to address it, and you can't make money on that. That would really be awkward, to say the least. But as an employer, we also realize that we're spending an enormous amount of money, either directly and indirectly, because we have employees with problematic debt, like most companies. And if you just start calculating how much money it actually costs an employer if they have employees with problematic debt, it's between 15,000 and 20,000 euro per year. And then we realize, hey, wait a minute, we have corporates with, especially if you, for example, cleaning companies or other companies with a lot of employees with low income, problematic debt is really around the corner. So we can provide services to those employers to help reduce the percentage of employees with problematic debt by really engaging with those employees to, at the end of the day, it's shortening the period between when the problem starts emerging and addressing it. On average, that takes 3 years, but then the hole people dug is really deep. But if you can, let's say, grab them and already start a conversation after 3 months, you really help the employees and you really help the employer because it saves a lot of money for the employer by addressing that.
What you said there about working through your clients, your corporate clients, to reach their employees is really interesting.
Yeah.
In fact, at BCG, we think about sort of 3 spheres of influence that a bank could have, kind of like the 3 scopes framework for climate, but applied to social. Sphere 1 being the direct influence you have with those within your 4 walls, like your employees. Scope 2 being the influence you have on those with a direct relationship, like your SME clients or your retail clients. Scope 3, or Sphere 3, being the influence you have via your corporate clients, either with their employees, with their clients, with their customers, and in their value chains.
Yep.
How do you think about those 3 spheres differently, and how do you engage, and what do you think your levers are to have an impact?
Yeah, you really have to kind of tailor to those 3 spheres. And I think we see a 4th one, but I'll get to that. But so to retail customers, it's, if you start looking through the people lens, you find things, for example, that at least in Western Europe, like women are 3 times more likely to become financially vulnerable during their life than men. Hey, wait a minute, maybe we can do something with that. And that could translate, for example, into financial planning kind of solutions for, let's say, women in their 20s. to help them become more resilient. So that's really like, addressing, issues there which are very closely linked to helping your clients better and serving your clients' needs better. With your employees, what we try to do is whatever we ask of our clients, we can tell that we do it ourselves as well, and quite often with a bit higher, more ambitious targets. So, for example, employing people with less access to the job market, so people with disabilities or with other kind of difficulties. Attracting those has helped us tremendously. For example, hiring refugees in our IT department. It's a tough, it's a battle for talent in the IT world. By attracting refugees and basically making maybe Python the common language that they already speak much more than the native language in our operation, really help them and us. But also, for example, in our detecting financial crime departments, there are a lot of people that are somewhere on the autistic spectrum. And they're fantastic at certain types of jobs and really amazing. And we've really benefited from them, and vice versa. Through our corporate clients, that has been the side or the sphere that has been most developed or the longest developed. And that's really looking at the value chain of your clients. And there, we've always been guided by the UN guiding principles and the OECD guidelines and saying, okay, what happens in the value chain, whether it's cocoa or coffee or palm oil, that's really where you can say, have a discussion with your clients, have leverage with your clients, but always from a solution-seeking point of view. And maybe the fourth sphere that I would like to add is really we can, as a financial institution, we can change the way, kind of the rules of the money game. So that's why we've been investing for a long time in impact reporting, because if you report the impact that you're having, and if we basically say these externalities that did not come into the cost price of money or other things, if we start including them, if we make them important, we can really kind of change the direction of where money is going. So we also try to influence the rules of the game of the financial world, and therefore the rules of how money is being allocated.
So you mentioned the work you do with your corporate clients and their value chains. In fact, we see that there is a lot more scrutiny nowadays being paid attention to clients and potential risks to their own reputation, where banks used to get called out for things they were doing with retail customers and with their own employees. Now banks are getting called out for issues with their own corporate clients. What are some of the specific things that ABN AMRO is doing and other banks should do to make sure that you are paying attention to this risk?
Yeah. Now, we've always been a bit kind of overexposed to this because our home base is in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is apparently the country with the highest NGO density globally. And then Amsterdam is even, the city with the most NGOs per square kilometer. So we've been overexposed to this because we've been, addressed on these issues by NGOs constantly. By following the UN guiding principles, basically that guideline helped us to really work systematically on this. And with currently European legislation being developed on the back of that, we're moving, from a reputational risk for our clients to a legal risk from our clients. So we're talking about business interruption risks. So the fact that we've been working on these UNGPs for quite some time, and it's never finished. Your due diligence can always improve, but it has really helped us to start preparing for this legislation and do it also in such a way that we can really help our clients. Okay, what should we look at? So, for example, we analyze value streams today. We can basically track where the supply chain of our clients through the money they pay, and say, hey, these are the hot buttons. This is the heat map of your supply chain. This is where you should pay attention. And right now, that's still voluntary and reputational risk, but in 3, 4, 5 years' time, it will be a legal risk. So let's sit down and work how you can manage these risks.
Many banks have had trouble determining how to organize around social impact and social topics within the bank. Could you tell me a little bit about how ABN AMRO does this and what benefits you think this brings? And is this something that perhaps other banks should emulate?
what you see with social impact is that it has a tendency to kind of to pop up everywhere in your organization because it's about people. So you see passionate people somewhere in your organization, building something, and then dependent if they get a little bit of support, it grows bigger. But it's completely unorganized. So it's kind of thousands flowers blossoming. The challenge is to organize that and to kind of manage it, but don't squeeze it because these people do that out of passion. So the moment you kind of be too stringent on them, you kill things. What helped us really is to introduce a structure in which you say, okay, go through these thought steps to really analyze where are we touching vulnerable people, what are the things we could do, and kind of go through a number of steps to determine, what should we do and what shouldn't we do. And then you also can have a very open discussion with people saying, okay, this is a fantastic thing you're doing right now, but it will never scale, or it will never really benefit clients in such a way. And then you can also say, so we'll leave it small. And it's wonderful to do, and please keep doing it, but there are other things that really have the potential to really grow bigger. So, for example, the initiative that we had to hire refugees, we're now discussing that with our corporate clients. Because we can now show, and like these were the benefits also to us as an organization, these are the societal benefits, and this is what it did to our license to operate, and this is what it did to our branding. And export that basically to our corporate clients. So I think light touch coordination, not army style, but kind of light touch coordination, but a very clear structure.
As a follow-up to that, I guess what we see is a lot of financial institutions are actually much more structured and organized when it comes to managing against climate change.
Yeah.
Right? How would you see the balance within a bank of climate versus social? Do you think they should be managed differently? What should be the relative focus, and do you think that's shifting over time?
I think it really depends on what business you're in. So you really have to look at it from a materiality point of view, and nowadays from a double materiality point of view. So you can't kind of say in generic terms, this is more important than that. But what you do see is that there's an enormous momentum behind climate. And climate has been simplified to just carbon or carbon equivalents and, in the scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting. That has oversimplified things, but it has created enormous momentum. What we're trying to do is kind of use that momentum and slip in, if you like, social with the momentum that climate has created. So when you're talking a 1.5 degree transition plan with your corporate clients, also talk about what the social implications are. Are they closing factories here and opening there? Are they sourcing from different regions? What are the social implications of those transition plans? And how can you manage those actively so that you reduce your business interruption risk, that you can actually have a conscious decision on where you're going to have negative impacts and how you can mitigate those and where you're going to have positive impacts.
In fact, Richard, you and I most recently met in December at ABN AMRO's 8th Annual Human Rights Conference, where the focus this year was on just transition. Tell me a bit about just transition and why it's important and how ABN AMRO thinks about its business and what it might actually do different to ensure that if it's helping its clients do the transition, they're doing it justly.
To echo European Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans, there's only going to be a transition if it's a just transition. And just transition is often looked at from global south, global north point of view. The global south contributed very little in global warming, but they're paying the highest price. Also the subject of the last COP. But also within societies, you see that the justness, the fairness of a transition is going to be very important. So as corporates, it's like it's the right thing to do. It's following the UNGPs, it's addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. It's also the fair thing to do from a societal perspective, because we really need to, contribute to the societal ability and willingness to go through this difficult period. And it's a smart thing to do from a corporate point of view, because it's reducing your transition risk and it's really building up the human capital in your organization, but also in your value chain, to really say, hey, I understand what is going on, I'm going to manage it proactively, and therefore I'm going to be successful in this transition.
Two standouts from that conference that I remember would be Ekaterina Chubarova from the International Labor Organization and Nikki Bowman from Shift. Can you tell me a little bit about how these two organizations are supporting the just transition topic and the influence that they may have?
Yeah, the ILO is of course coming from a worker's perspective, and they have identified pretty early on like what the impacts are going to be on workers. So a very basic example, if you're moving away from fossil, those are union jobs, and you might be moving to non-union jobs, and people might become more vulnerable there. So they're really coming from that angle. What it provides to any corporate and also to banks is like a framework where identifying the prime risks to look at. So helping you with your own analysis on, okay, what should I look at? Where are the main risks? Shift is a organization that is helping companies basically to implement the UN Guiding Principles. So they have this whole plethora of methodologies and of structures to say, okay, how should I act in what situation? And basically, it's a business learning program. So companies help each other in tackling with that. What they provided to us is this insight that really your transition risk from a business perspective might, for example, be really limited. But if you look at it through a people lens, the impact might be significant. And if that's the case, you might want to kind of think like, okay, but if this has such a big impact on people, I want to know it up front and I want to address it, because then I can manage it. So adding this people lens really helped us in very basic things like including that lens in any credit proposal. And that is really taking a different perspective. And by applying this different perspective, you really get different insights and very meaningful discussion with your clients.
Many banks recognize publicly the importance of a just transition, but there's really very little guidance out there to banks on what they should be doing differently to take justness into account as they're working through their own net zero plans or those of their clients. What exactly can a bank do differently?
Yeah, this area is new for everybody, so it's also new for us, and it's really one of the things where you're building the bridge while walking on it. So one of the things we did, for example, we are part of the Banking Environment Initiative supported by Cambridge University. Combine knowledge from academics and apply it to your own business. So very practical example, SMEs are vulnerable here because a multinational company may just shift production from one country to another, but SMEs can't. So what kind of policies and actions, and it could also be lobbying, for example, can you do on behalf of SMEs to strengthen basically their position? So we see certain value chains where there's really human rights issues in the value chain. Those SMEs can't address it. They can't go to Brussels and say do this or to their national government, let alone the government of the country of origin. But we can. We can say, hey, we have hundreds of clients in this particular business. This is an issue for them. We can, together with maybe trade organizations, address this at European level or address this at national level, and really help them reduce their business interruption risk. And turn it into practice. You turn this whole just transition context into really practical things. But we might be one page further in the book, but we're still at the very beginning of the book. We're learning as we're doing it. So I guess the most important thing is like keep an open mind, be curious, translate what you hear into how can this impact my clients and therefore my balance sheet. I mean, it sounds selfish, but that's often kind of the best way to get it addressed internally, is to really say, hey, this is at the end of the day impacting the future proofness, the future readiness of my client base. And if my client base is more future proof, I'll be more future proof. And by having the dialogue with your clients, you first of all probably learn a lot. which you can implement then in other clients in the same sector or across sectors. So reaching out, having that open mind and having it on your radar is maybe at this phase kind of the best thing you can do.
Richard, let's talk a little bit about trust. Trust is a very important topic in banking, both internally and externally. Tell me a little bit about how a bank can ensure that through its clients, with its employees, it can really help live its values and show that it's doing it in a very genuine way.
Trust is a very hard thing also because you might be impacted by external forces that really hurt your trust. But the most important thing we see is if you have really embedded that in your purpose or your mission, if you have a strategy to execute it and can relate back then in the decisions you make, like, okay, how does this work in line with our purpose, in line with our strategy or not? And those are often tough discussions because it's often about, hey, but there's a short-term gain, but there might be a reputational loss down the line. Having those honest discussions and also in having the discussions in a transparent setting, for example, having an ethical committee and then publishing internally the outcomes of your discussions and the process of the discussions can really help gain trust internally. And then externally, I think the most important, but also the tough thing to do is to be consistent and to stay consistent. And then have patience because you will not be recognized immediately. You will not be applauded immediately. But build up a track record of consistent behavior, and then slowly but surely it will be recognized by your employees and by your clients.
Richard, before we go, I'd like to ask, what are we missing? Are there any particular topics that we haven't talked about today that you think is important that you would like to raise?
Well, we addressed it a little bit, but it's all interconnected. So, for example, biodiversity. We didn't discuss biodiversity, but biodiversity loss will create societal pressure and will societal stress, climate adaptation risk. So, for example, take a clothing factory in Morocco. If it's currently only 3 days a year above 40 degrees, that's manageable. But if over time it's going to be 3 months a year above 40 degrees, that location might be the wrong location, or you might have to really invest in that factory, or people might even move away from that region. You only see that if you look at these risks in an integrated way. As banks, we got used to reporting on, or we're getting used to reporting on carbon, maybe grudgingly, but most boards now know about scope 1, 2, and 3 on carbon. We're not comfortable in that way with social yet, but I guarantee you that in a couple of years' time, boards will be able to talk about social as they are talking about climate today.
Richard, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for your insights.